Whereas the father's contributions to the book itself, particularly easy to identify given its theatrical format, tend to indulge in ponderous navel-gazing and a kind of witless scab-picking. At the end of the book, he requests an Uber, and a UFO comes instead and takes him away. My immediate thought when I read that was, I hope the crew has a good supply of air freshener. Gabby's writing is of great subtlety and refinement. Her contributions, which are unmistakably conspicuously Gabby, are limpid, intricate, supple, silky, delicate, spontaneous, rapturously phrased. She manages both a breeziness, a sprezzatura, and a pungency. Whenever Gabby speaks, an uninhibited liveliness and charm is restored to the text. She saves the book. Here is a happy, capering mind, a blith, skipping here, then there, then over there, but always looking back to make sure you're still with her, solicitous and kind-hearted that way. And I can't imagine that it's not Gabby and Gabby alone who was ultimately responsible for the book's remarkable scope and meticulous granularity. It's as if she combed through this sordid subculture in pursuit of its tiniest louse eggs in order to create this shimmering mosaic, this mandala of nits. I'm going to read that again. Gabby's writing is of great subtlety and refinement. Her contributions, which are unmistakably, conspicuously Gabby, are limpid, intricate, supple, silky, delicate, spontaneous, rapturously phrased. She manages both a breeziness, a sprezzatura, and a pungency. Whenever Gabby speaks, an uninhibited liveliness and charm is restored to the text. She saves the book. Here is a happy, capering mind, a blith, skipping here, then there, then over there, but always looking back to make sure you're still with her, solicitous and kind-hearted that way. And I can't imagine that it's not Gabby and Gabby alone who was ultimately responsible for the book's remarkable scope and meticulous granularity. It's as if she combed through this sordid subculture in pursuit of its tiniest louse eggs in order to create this shimmering mosaic, this mandala of nits. Gabby actually confided in me at some point that afternoon, perhaps during one of those interludes when her alcoholic father had passed out after hydroplaning on a slick of his own vomit, that because of the complexity of Kermunkachunk's criminal underground, there are said to be more sub-factions of the Chilesian Mafia faction than there are atoms in the solar system. And the ever-proliferating indeterminacies in the Chilesian language, more about which later, their accumulated data was too voluminous to transmit over the internet, so it was placed on hard disks and flown back to the Wilhelm Klink Institute for Social Research in Bonn, Germany. Patient. It's blurry now. Higgsfed Lunk Erv Mexen Shiv Kubrit Mund Yedis Dixe Fasa Sajdu Nakpetidul Urbik Finnen Lokach Uveses Hoibagud The Kapumpum Remudiflu. Optometrist. Can you read any of this, or is it also too blurry? Patient. No, I can read it. At one point, with an alacrity and élan that characterized her generation's finest minds, she whipped out her phone and showed me a video of Russian weightlifter Tatiana Kasharina being administered smelling salts, ammonia inhalants, by her coach before her clean and jerk. She also showed me a photo of a heavily tattooed LA Mexican gangbanger taking a bubble bath with a little extraterrestrial-looking monkey, adding with a wink, "I like that lifestyle." And although I wasn't at all sure what lifestyle she was referring to, I thought it was a super charming, super cute remark. It's just so Gabby. Intimidatingly, castratingly, erudite, and super cute. Qualities never more manifest than when she and her father play fuck, marry, kill at the bar Polpo. sometime before he embarks on his dance of death. If you have the opportunity, try to see Gabby's Mouchette on East 4th, a shrewd and stylish feminist homage to Robert Bresson's 1967 film Mouchette. It culminates in its own sublime and emotionally devastating danse macabre. She also has a beautiful voice. There's a scene in the book during which she signs Stephen Foster's Hard Times Come Again No More while her father chokes on his own saliva, and it's amazing. Oh, I said signs, and it says sings. Shit. It's pretty late-term dyslexia. There's a scene in the book during which she sings Stephen Foster's Hard Times Come Again No More while her father chokes on his own saliva, and it's amazing. There's a musicality to her very presence, to the modulating intonations in her speaking voice, to her gestures and movements which evoke classical Indian dance. A kinetic fluidity that conjures up images of multi-armed Hindu goddesses like Durga and Kali. Sometimes I'd catch her just whistling to herself like one of those insouciantly happy chirping birds in Snow White. And it's not some inane ditzy kind of whistling either. She's thinking about very abstruse Heideggerian sorts of things like Heraclitus and Holderlin while she whistles, believe me. This whistling is, of course, completely unlike the whistling gases of the moribund father, we might as well call him Little Poppy at this point, or that of the optometrist. The patient suddenly stops, flushed with curiosity about how the professor's introduction could possibly include a reference to the optometrist. Would the professor somehow intertextually allude to her? She wonders a quiver with mounting excitement. She wants him to. And you can sense her disappointment when the professor returns to his animus toward the father. There's a twinge of petulant impatience in her voice as she resumes her reading. Patient. I try not to hate him. He's not stupid, he's just a particularly unprepossessing person. A pathetic, disheveled, socially inept little man with a gigantic chip on his shoulder. A self-pitying lush who lurches unpredictably from belligerence to maudlin tears, who looks and smells like death warmed over. But he's adept in his way. He has a certain armamentarium at his disposal, of which Gabby is, in a manner of speaking, an essential component. I have dreams of literally shitting him, of looking down into the toilet bowl and seeing that red face, mottled with broken blood vessels from a lifetime of alcohol abuse, seeing that floating red turd face simpering up at me from the water. There's also a dream in which I'm sitting by a gurney in the hallway of a clinic in the slums of some teeming megalopolis, and he looks up at me and asks, how long do I have left, and how bad will it get? But I awake from this one hating him even more and spending the whole ensuing day seething as I grade papers in my office, giving everyone C's and D's. But Gabby, I can't get her out of my mind. I'm deeply in love with her. I know I am. The patient pauses, sighs. Patient, her eyeballs extruding little bubbly heart emojis as she reads. Needless to say, at this point, it's Gabby's book, both in the sense of her stealing the show and in the sense of her, as is my strong suspicion, having done all the work. I think he basically just throws things out there to see what your reaction will be. to see if he can get a rise out of you, which I suppose one could argue constitutes a kind of writing. Putting aside the criminal omission of Gabby as co-author, she is, I suspect, the sole author. The book is a masterwork, a claim hardly to be seriously contested at this point in history. It is already considered the standard reference work on the Chilesian mafia faction. No one has more cogently analyzed or more vividly portrayed the enigmatic figure of the divine hermit, whose frenzied saturnalias have the outward appearance of a man listlessly playing solitaire in a cell. In the same way that Lichtenstein used Ben-Day dots to denature and sublimate the gestural factura of the expressionistic brushstroke, the divine hermits use letter permutation to denature and sublimate the violence of the Chilesian mafia faction, whose street soldiers slaughter their victims out on the piazza and inoculate them, flinging their eyeballs at the windows of the bar Polpo. Notwithstanding my feelings about the father, who really is a revolting little scumbag, a weird little fucking drunken gnome, when he left I drenched my hands in Purell. And realizing that one makes this sort of judgment at one's peril, I think Last Orgy of the Divine Hermit may come to be read as one of the great anthropological adventures of modern literature. If I thought otherwise, I would never have agreed to write this introduction. On a more ominous note, several weeks after their visit, I received a dozen roses from the father, the petals made out of prosciutto, which I took to be some sort of threat. This was followed several days later by a vague invitation to join him and his daughter in Kermunkachunk at some point in the future, an invitation I warily accepted. The letter was unsigned, but it was handwritten in his characteristically childish block letter print. I say childish because it was so perfect, as each letter were formed under the reproachful scrutiny of some bony, basilisk-breathed martinet standing over him. What the fuck is basilisk-breathed? Can't wait to find out what basilisk breath means. He added a postscript, referring presumably to Last Orgy of the Divine Hermit, the ethnography he and his daughter had yet to write. If Joan Rivers had gone to the electric chair instead of Ethel Rosenberg, this is the book she would have written. Optometrist. Okay, great. Now, can you read any of this? Patient. Ryan Murphy's limited series about a nasal, anorexic, handcuffed Momofuku noodle, bar dishwasher's festering toupee fetish. Optometrist. Hold on for just a sec. He switches lenses in the phoropter. How about now? Patient. Oh, wow. Optometrist. From the top, if you don't mind. Patient. Gerhard Richter's painting of a naked schizophrenic hunchbacked nurse, or nun perhaps, feeding a toucan, a fish stick, was purchased by a Chilesian mafia faction godfather for his daughter's quinceañera for 4 kanakazillion, 500 monokanakazillion dollars, and now hangs in the lobby of the floating casino. Optometrist. Excellent. Patient. There, nestled amidst the Bulgarian Veuve Clicquot and Bottega Veneta showcases, it is flanked by 2 of Chilesia's most totemic works of art. A painting depicting the delirium of the piazza, hissing projectiles that generate waves of energy, hurtling trajectories of force propelled outward so they impinge upon the viewer, and one of a crying clown seated on the toilet in one of the stalls of the men's room at the bar Polpo. Both appear to be crayon doodles that one might make on a placemat. The floating casino, where divine hermits levitating in ithyphallic endlessly shuffle their lettered tiles, is a fabulous Qing Dynasty villa that was purchased by a consortium of CMF warlords and transported from Hangzhou to Lake Little Lake, home to the world's only freshwater octopus, in 2035. I'm going to read that again. The floating casino, where divine hermits levitating and ithyphallic endlessly shuffle their lettered tiles, is a fabulous Qing Dynasty villa that was purchased by a consortium of CMF warlords and transported from Hangzhou to Lake Little Lake, home to the world's only freshwater octopus, in 2035. Seen through the lake's mist, it seems to actually float in the air. The high-pitched drone of the speedboats, which continuously orbit this former Chateau de Plaisance, can be heard as far away as the piazza. Focusing an ethnography, i.e. a folk tale, on a drunk father and daughter who, before the father's dance of death, say goodbye to each other for the last time, the last orgy, always risks a descent into sentimentality, but there's not even a smidgen of it here. Instead, we're treated to a grand exposition of the merciless ethos of the Chilesian mafia faction street soldier. Mendelssohn is getting some. Capriccio Brilliant, Opus 27. Let's listen, shall we? Get some, Mendelssohn, get some. Roger Norrington is the conductor, and we have Sergei Edelman on the keyboards. And now back to Last Orgy of the Divine Hermit. Just who or what are these dreaded, violent, unapproachable young people who once delighted audiences of mostly relatives at the Chilesian Children's Theater and now pelt the windows of the Bar Pulpo with the plucked eyeballs of their enemies? In one scene, two men, police agents working undercover as father and daughter, walk into the Bar Pulpo, one wearing black jeans, a black velour V-neck, and desert boots, the other a knockoff Dolce & Gabbana teal miniskirt and matching bustier. They sit down at the bar, have a drink, reconnoiter the premises, and exit. Soon after they leave, a Chilesian mafia faction street soldier enters, casually huffing from a container of varnish remover and humming All I Ask of You from Phantom of the Opera. Even though we know he's just killed at least one of the cops, he's wearing his miniskirt and bustier and rolling his eyeballs in his hand like Captain Queeg. He still seems to us somehow charming, almost genteel, as he sits himself down at the bar and accepts a roofied drink from some perverted sex tourist. The street soldier, whose exaggerated wink at the audience betrays a definite musical theater background, put the Rohypnol in his own drink. Despite the fact that it's one of the book's most delightful and richly evoked scenes, the budding friendship between this kid and the tourist, a beer-bellied American in a Midas cap, comes out of nowhere and feels dramaturgically unearned. A man strolls in from the piazza and serenades them, playing a lute made out of cardboard and dental floss. And then the street soldier disappears into the night, the cloud of ink into which he withdraws like an octopus. How are Chilesian mafia faction street soldiers called to the piazza, to the wild scrambling and hurtling of bodies in that no-man's land? We can hear them wetting the tines of their forks on the pavement stones, for God's sake. Are they signaled somehow by the divine hermits, those levitating, ithyphallic, mystic zaddiks, perpetually shuffling their lettered tiles at the floating casino? Or is this just something we want so much to be true, that the permutation of letters produces manifest reality. One pockmarked young woman with the soulless eyes of a sociopath and a glue sniffer's rash around her mouth, who only months ago had delighted audiences in a Chilesian children's theater stage adaptation of Amelia Bedelia, says that yes, they are signaled to come out to the piazza and that the signal feels like that tingling sensation in your nose just before you sneeze, the slightest twinge of sciatica at the top of the buttocks, a fizziness or a sizzling in the perineum. The patient pauses, fishes out a tiny airline bottle of Tito's vodka from her bag, cracks it open and takes a sip, the implication being perhaps that she's receiving the signal. Patient, a fizziness or a sizzling in the perineum. Optometrist, excellent. Patient, these CMF street soldiers whose weapons of choice are the Austrian-made Steyr M9 semi-automatic pistol and the melon baller, seek what the ancient Greeks called a kalos thanatos, a beautiful death. They seek their aristeia, their finest and frequently final scene. And even when attempting to justify their acts of gratuitous brutality, they typically resort to the lyrics of the songs they'd, up until recently, belted out on stage at the Chilesian Children's Theater, responding to a question about how he can so casually gouge out the eyeballs of another human being. One gaunt young man, huffing Scotchgard as he speaks, says, "Who can explain it? Who can tell you why? Fools give you reasons. Wise men never try," rotely regurgitating the lyrics of Some Enchanted Evening from Rodgers and Hammerstein's South Pacific. As another glassy-eyed Condra slurs, a chemical odor on her breath from the butter-flavored Noke Stick cooking spray she continuously huffs, quote, "The reality we perceive is a mere epiphenomenon arising from the underlying structure of the brain." Epiphenomenon, why do I use that word? The reality we perceive is a mere epiphenomenon arising from the underlying structure of the brain, which is itself an epiphenomenon arising from purely mathematical properties. Topological homogeneity, supersymmetry, stochastic dynamics, etc., etc. In other words, reality is a surface effect of mathematics, which gets us back to the shuffling of the lettered tiles, the permutation of letters, all the mystical shit that the defined hermits talk about all the time, end of quote. Then, staring off into the distance, she murmurs something in Chilesian, something that sounds like, but most likely is not, quote, "Justin Bobby," end of quote, as if she were beseeching Audrina Partridge's on-again, off-again boyfriend in the reality series The Hills, before convulsing and losing consciousness, as if it were just another day out on the piazza, as if suddenly, fleetingly, we were out on the moors of Wuthering Heights. Later, reading from one of the big character posters mounted along the periphery of the piazza, she recites the poem whose final stanza has become the blood-curdling cri de guerre of the Chilesian mafia faction. Sitting on the dock of the bay in Spider-Man pajamas, my wounded, trepanned skull swathed in a turban of bandages. Let me start it again. Sitting on the dock of the bay in Spider-Man pajamas, my wounded, trepanned skull swathed in a turban of bandages. No fucks to give. Raspberry beret. Transvaginal mess. God damn it, I fucked up again. One more chance. Let me run up against it again. Sitting on the dock of the bay in Spider-Man pajamas, my wounded, trepanned skull swathed in a turban of bandages. No fucks to give. Raspberry beret. Transvaginal mesh. Neo-Nazi Menage a Trois, Octopus Neurophysiology, Illuminati Antifada. Stay secret. Stay hydrated. Rock on. According to Last Orgy of the Divine Hermit, the Chilesian Mafia faction is riddled with agents provocateurs, and in many, if not all, sub-factions, agents provocateurs outnumber actual members. In fact, the most crucial prerequisite to becoming a member of the Chilesian Mafia faction is that you are an agent provocateur. In other words, there are no members of the Chilesian Mafia faction who are not agents provocateurs. Also, male CMF street soldiers prefer older women and heavier women. A popular greeting used when encountering someone you haven't seen recently is, "I liked you better fat." To the young male CMF street soldier, the haggard, world-weary look of a middle-aged woman slouched on a subway at the end of a workday, that exhausted, bedraggled, "They don't pay me enough for this shit. I just want to get home, get out of these clothes, change into something comfortable, microwave a bite to eat, and watch something trashy on television" look is considered to be super hot. In the book, a heavily armed stud swaggering across the piazza is shown a photo of the 23-year-old Sports Illustrated swimsuit model Alexis Rin, and makes a finger-in-the-mouth gagging gesture. For your average Kermunkachunkian street soldier, sex with a premenopausal woman is, if not completely taboo, considered weird. These CMF thugs are taught that their martyrdom out on the piazza will lead to a paradise with a sort of chill, anodyne, crate and barrel vibe. Thanks to the recreational inhalation of nail polish remover, their brains turn to glass by the time most of them reach their mid-20s. Which few of them actually do. The vitrified brain of a CMF street soldier inlaid with jade and mother of pearl is currently on display in the lobby of the floating casino on Lake Little Lake. So, Last Orgy of the Divine Hermit is not only a masterly examination of what it means to be a drunk father and daughter in a bar whose gore-encrusted windows are being perpetually pelted with the enucleated eyeballs of the victims of an internecine gang war, but also an unflinching examination of who we've become as passengers on a shipwrecked planet. And given the thousands of variants that stream across the spoken word karaoke screens at the bar Polpo, it should come as no surprise that a recent version of the folktale casts the father as an ethnographer and the daughter as a glamorous filmmaker. In another variant, the daughter is neither beautiful nor sympathetic, but an anti-Semitic, hatchet-faced spinster. In one of his final moments of lucidity and literally grasping at straws, those poking out of his cans of glucerna, the dying father asks, "What do you think is going to happen to me?" The daughter responds, "You're going to become something that's not you." And only then is the father able to die peacefully. And the daughter is magically transformed into a beautiful princess, a filmmaker. Some versions don't even take place in Chilesia at all. In one, the daughter has been accepted into the Columbia University Graduate Film Studies program, but can't decide whether she really wants to go or not. I'm going to read that again. Some versions don't even take place in Chilesia at all. In one, the daughter has been accepted into the Columbia University Graduate Film Studies program, but can't decide whether she really wants to go or not. And instead of at the bar Polpo in Kermunkachunk, she meets the father at Yakiniko Futago, a Japanese barbecue restaurant with a great bar, on 17th Street between 5th and 6th Avenues in Manhattan. to discuss the matter. In another version, the father and daughter, named Caesar and Little Madonna, are extinct rodent-like mammals called multituberculates, who've been kept in a cryostat for several years. They are finally reanimated by an elderly and eccentric paleontologist. In this one, too, Little Madonna ultimately gets into the Columbia University Graduate Film Studies program, etc., etc. Over the course of the text, many other folk tales are cited en passant. There's one about an inexhaustible stick of deodorant. Another about a husband who loves his wife so much that he deliberately mistreats her at the end of his life so she'll be happy when he dies. These are all the sorts of folk tales, or fact patterns, as they're called now, that flight attendants routinely pantomime in the aisle before takeoff.